Welcome everyone, this is Shadow Drake, and on this video I am going to teach you how to build a phase change device for heating and cooling. Feel free to skip around on the videos as I will go through several sections. First section will be talking about the differences between what current systems for atmospheric control. Then I'll talk about what you need. Then finally how to build the skeletal structure of the system, figuring out a stable temperature source to use with this system, and then finally how to properly pressurize and with a coolant as well as considerations for coolant. So to start us off, why would you even want to use a system like this? Well, Stationeers has, in my opinion, probably three systems for atmospheric or pipe temperature control, and they range from how useful, well, not useful, how easy it is to set up to how more complicated setups. So the first things that you will be familiar with will be wall heaters as well as pipe heaters as well as coolers. For what they require from their kits, you don't require very many resources. Pipe Bender Tier 1, they are devices that you can basically set and forget. But now, here comes the big thing. Idle, they may be 10 watts, but when they're active, they use 1000 watts of power to move exactly 1000 joules of thermal energy. This is a one-to-one conversion, fairly inefficient compared to the next few systems, but the simplicity that you can just plop them, turn them on, and use them is good enough for either emergency uses or for when you're first starting to dabble into this. Uh, they do have data connections that you can automate, but by the time you start to get to automation for these things, I would recommend that you just swap over to an AC atmospheric system. And if you're going to go for really big on automation for your atmospheric controls, then ACs or phase change devices would be better in the sense of power efficiency. Yes, they work, they're simple, good to use, but definitely move on from there. The next system, as I mentioned, will be the atmospherics AC. As you can see, once again, pipe bender requires a little bit more materials to construct and more devices needed from them. And so we go to the air conditioner. Now, one of the things about the air conditioner that is a leg up is significantly reduced power usage. Once again, 10 watts idle, but when they're fully active, they will consume an additional 355 watts. It doesn't say anywhere on here how much it will consume, but for using a third of the power, it moves significantly more thermal energy. This comes with its drawbacks as well, though. One of the major drawbacks is that you need a waste connection or an extra output connection, as you see, pipe waste. This pipe waste needs to be as close to your target temperature that you set. Once that pipe waste connection gets above 55 Celsius difference, you will see your thermal moving efficiency dramatically drop. And 70 Celsius is understood to be the limit of when the system just outright will not move thermal energy very well. So, but one of the major uh, benefits is that unlike the wall heaters and pipe heaters, you have the ability to set your temperature and start it, and there you go. The system is set up. And now comes the phase change device systems. Obviously, phase change devices are going to require using gases to move your thermal energy around. And as from the principles of phase change mechanics, all they do will move thermal energy. It doesn't magically generate or remove energy within an enclosed system, within a closed loop system. And so with that, just like the AC system, you will also need a waste connection or a stable-ish thermal source that you will either draw energy from or push energy into. Now, the kit is made in the hydraulic pipe bender, and as you can see, you start to need steel. So you will at least need a furnace. Uh, Evaporation and condensation chambers work very similarly. They have a base power usage of 50 watts. This is constant. They will not use more or less based on settings. It is just a constant 50-watt draw. But the beauty of the system is that evaporation chambers will cool their waste pipe connection, which is going to be probably input 2. They will cool, and in the converse end, condensation chambers will warm up their connection. And so for this simple phase change device, we're going to use one of each. So we'll have a system that uses 100 watts total, and it will move thermal energy. But again, this depends on setup, the coolants used, and what you have available to you. So now with that brief overview, let's get on to the building. Now, on this shelf, we will have things that you will need. We will have our 2 phase change devices, steel sheets to finish the build. Heavily recommend insulated piping. Since the phase change devices require steel, you're already at a position to make these, so go on ahead. You will need pressure regulators for both filling the system as well as pressurizing liquid pipes. Pipe valves will be here for safety measures. Pressure regulators can also be used for safety measures. And on this end, I just have extra materials that can be used to build up the system or to make a stable temperature source. And that could be tanks, insulated or not, depends on the planet. More building materials, and I will use the power vent on this case to fill it up. Active vents work, but because they only work on one cell, it will fill up my system slow. And with Mars Atmo, there's not a lot of atmosphere to work with. Now, I will mention that power vents and counterflow heat exchangers require Tier 2 pipe bender. They will improve the system, but are not necessary at the beginning. So, for a simple phase change device, the first step will be to build the basic skeleton of the group. For this situation, I am going to use this fuel tank at 7 Celsius, and let's just say we're going to cool it down to negative 20 Celsius. So we will build a system to cool this down to 20 Celsius, and on the other end I will need a stable temperature source. So I will talk about that later. So with phase change, the evaporation chamber will be what cools, and that will be close to my target tank. On the opposite end will be my condensation chamber, and this will be where my thermal energy will be pushed to. This build is fairly simple for what it is. It doesn't have a lot of stuff to go with it. Wrong pipes. And so you can just build it up. So now how many pipe connections you put in between the devices doesn't really matter. More pipes has more volume, gives you a little bit more safety in regards to when you overpressurize pipes. And this could be as long or as short as you wanted. I could have technically built the devices almost back to back. You just basically need to connect their input and output connections that are on both on one side together. This will form a closed loop pair for the system so that they can feed each other in regards that once they start working. Next thing I need to do is wire up power. Oops. Alright, with that, let's take a look-see. Let me just organize my tools. Alright, this is the basic skeletal structure of the system. Literally just 2 chambers connected together. Your target tank that is going to be, or target device, tank, radiators, whatever, will be connected to one of the chambers. In this case, since I'm cooling, this will be connected to the evaporation chamber. And on the other end will be a stable temperature source. Now, what defines a stable temperature source? It really is just a thermal tank, any type of connection that is filled with a gas that is not going to change its temperature that readily. Most of the times, this will be something related with planetary atmosphere. In this case, I am going to take Mars atmosphere to pressurize this system and have a relatively stable temperature source. Now, how you go about this in different planets is probably where the engineering and ingenuity has to take place, because not all planets are simple or easy to work with. Vacuum planets, you have literally no atmosphere. However, it is easier for them to radiate energy. Power. For a planet like Mars that has a working temperature of 20 Celsius to negative 40 Celsius, it's much easier to set up these systems. For Europa or Vulcan or Venus, you have to get a little bit more creative to work with the planetary atmosphere. But it doesn't have to be planetary atmosphere. I just heavily recommend planetary atmosphere because in the long run, it is what you will push energy or draw atmosphere to fuel your system. And the less steps you have to work with, the less of a headache you have for figuring out where you went wrong. So for Europa, for example, you can start with your cold air, use phase change loops to warm it up. Vulcan, you can start with cold night air. Venus, unfortunately, you have to use two AC systems to get to a good point, because the limits of phase change is about 360 Celsius, if I remember right, with 370 Celsius, and water is the only gas coolant you can use for such an extreme temperatures. But anything below 370 Celsius, there's going to be a gas that works with you. So I just pressurized this to 2 megapascals. The more, the better. But I don't want to deal with phase change issues with the pollutants condensing. So with that, once again, evaporation chamber connected to my target, condensation chamber connected to my stable temperature source. This will be a cooling setup. On a heating setup, it will be the opposite. This will be a condensation chamber. This will be an evaporation chamber. And overall, no real change to the skeletal structure. So now comes the final consideration. What coolant to use and how to set up these devices. This is probably where most people will draw a blank with the phase change setup. And so this part I'll go a little bit slower. But the general method is the same, just about, with any type of heating or cooling. So, first of all, you have to understand what you're working with. So, if I'm going to cool this to negative 20 Celsius, I need to pick a gas that can exist as a liquid at that point. So while I could use water, the issue with water is at 20 Celsius, well, can't use water. My bad. Just thinking 20 Celsius. Can't use water because it freezes it below 0. So water is out. There are only two gases that readily condense at this point. And that will be nitrous oxide and pollutants. Now, if we look at nitrous oxide, we already have a problem. Negative 21 Celsius, it freezes. While you can set up the system to go as low as negative 20, the issue is once you get close to that freezing point, you're going to run a risk of freezing nitrous oxide, which leads to pipe breaks, which leads to headaches, which leads to lots of stuff to clean up. So in this case, our best choice would be pollutants. And as you can see, pollutants freeze at negative 100 Celsius. And the max liquid temperature is 152 Celsius. So we have a very good big range. Now, if you aren't sure how to read the phase change diagram, this side is from this blue line left is where it freezes. This section up here is where your gas will be a liquid, and this entire section down here is where it will stay as a gas. Now, because we're working on negative 20 Celsius, we're going to be between this range. Additional reason I'm using pollutant is because Mars' atmosphere can get lower than negative 20. If you filled your made a stable temperature source of something colder, once again, freezing NOS problems, headaches. So this is why we're going to fill the system with pollutants. Now, I have a tank of pollutants here, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with the filling. First thing you want to do is always pressurize your liquid pipe network you just created. Liquids can only exist as a liquid so long as they have some pressure within its pipe network. If you forget this fact, you will have pollutants being made, which will then evaporate in your liquid pipe network until they hit the pressure they need. And more evaporation means more cooling, which means you could freeze that system before you even get started. So just pressurize it. Now, since I'm going to go down to negative 20 Celsius, I'm just going to go ahead and pressurize this to about 3 megs. Now, in this case, I'm only using pollutants because I don't really have another gas source to use here. I didn't pipe up anything extra. I mean, I have some NOS here, but that's not going to work because it will condense faster than pollutants. And again, big headache. So let's see. Now I'm going to go on ahead and set up a pressure regulator for priming the system, pumping all the gas to the system. And I will go on ahead and wire it. Now, one drawback to this is you need to have quite a bit of gas of the gas stored of the pollutant, bleh, of the coolant you intend to use. Move stuff around me, neat. So this might be something that may take some while to set up. Starting out, you probably won't have a good amount of any coolant, but once you get to a point where you're making tanks and filtering different gases out, you should have plenty. Now, next comes how to set it. If you recall, I said we're going to try to target negative 20 Celsius. And if we look at the phase change diagram, go down to negative 20 Celsius. That'll be, let's just use 29 to 25 kilopascals. We'll just use that. Or let's just use 2900. That's a little lower, but that's close. Now that your evaporation chamber is set, go ahead and turn it on. Now, condensation chamber, since this is what's going to be dumping our thermal energy, we can just set it to max. You can set it to lower, but if you do that, this will act as a throttle to the system. The system will only work so long as this stable temperature source is below what the maximum condensation pressure is for the device. In this case, it has to be less than 152 Celsius for this to work. Now, so long as it's stable, it shouldn't vary too much. Oh, forgot. Yep, that's on. Now that that is set up, we just have to add pollutants. Go on ahead and turn on. And now you will see the condensation chamber start to fill up. Now it's going to try to get at 6 megapascals, but it will never reach it. Since the temperature is about 35 Celsius, you will begin to see condensation happen at about 3,800 kilopascals, give or take. So now how does the system work? Well, as you fill this up, this will hit a point where the pollutants will condense. As you can see, condensation's happening. That liquid condensation is going to flow over to our evaporation chamber. And now this evaporation chamber is going to fill up to our set point, 2.9 megs. What you want to do is make sure this evaporation chamber hits its set point, and then as you can see, the liquid number is going to slowly climb up. I would recommend at least 5 liters of liquid evaporating, capped out to about 15 liters. This will give you a safety net. so that if for some reason the two temperature sources get wildly out of whack, you have some space within your, you have some buffer within your pipe system to prevent bursts, overpressurization on either end. So it's almost at 5 liters. Okay, going ahead and shut that off. All right, and that's it. This whole system is completely set up. And you're done and ready. For a cooling loop, now you're going to see that we are evaporating pollutants. And as you can see by the latent heat, it is removing roughly 7 kilojoules of thermal energy. And in the condensation chamber, you'll see that it is dumping that energy into our temperature source, which is warming up. Now, what affects how effective the system is depends on your coolant. If we look at pollutants, it has a latent heat of 2 kilojoules per mole. Now, I did consider nitrous oxide, and as you can see that nitrous oxide has 4 kilojoules per mole. It will be more effective at pushing and pulling thermal energy out of the system. But once again, you have to absolutely consider what temperature ranges you will be working with. As you can see, Mars, we're already at negative 48 Celsius. That is far too low for nitrous oxide. Now, like I mentioned with the temperature source, stable temperature source, you could use radiators or whatever system you could think you can come up with to try to keep it at a relatively stable temp. Out of pipes. So yeah, something like this could help with dumping off some of extra thermal energy. It's not going to work too well, but that's Mars. But yeah, this will be a simple phase change loop diagram. Now, if I wanted to do heating, I would reverse the steps. So let's shut this off. So the opposite end, if I wanted to heat this up, this tank up, and this will be this fuel tank would have been my stable temperature source, I would instead look to, let me disconnect this pipe. I would instead reverse the process. So if I wanted to heat this to 50 Celsius, go back to my pollutants. Celsius, 4.5 megs. And the evaporation chamber will be as low as it can be. I'll just hit 100. Turn the system on. And so now, you'll see that this will be condensing, trying to push thermal energy into this insulated tank while drawing it from this pollutant tank. Now, one of the things when you set up a heating setup is you're actually needing to pay attention to this pipe network up here. See, this is way overpressurized. You don't want this much in this pipe network due to the pipe stresses. You want to fill this up so that both chambers once again are filled, but this intermediary pipe between the two does not have any condensation. Actually, you don't want that in either loop. If you have any phase changes happening in the pipes between the two, your system will become much less stable. As you can see here, I am condensing a lot of pollutants in here. Most of this thermal energy isn't even making it to our condensation chamber. So let's set this back to cooling. Oh, yep. And let's save this back to 2900. I forgot to shut that off. Now, what is one improvement you can do to the system? Uh, Easiest one, counterflow exchangers. Let's go ahead and shut everything off. Now, counterflow exchangers will do a very good job at equalizing the temperature between the two flowing coolants. This will help the system to work much better. And for easy addition, just place it in between. Ah, my burst. Okay, that's fine for now. Yeah, grown. I should have thought about this. I got a lot of stuff in the way. And remove my systems. Now, with the counterflow exchanger, you want the version that's gas and liquid. And above all, make sure that the liquid is flowing towards the evaporation chamber and the gas towards the condensation chamber. It really is a perfect fit for this system for an upgrade. It does require some steel sheets to build up, and again, requires a tier 2 bender. So this is an upgrade you'll have to build later. I'm gonna need some pipes. And go ahead and connect them. There you go. Now I'll turn on the system again. On and on. Alright. And as you can see over here, they will roughly even out, but they are the coolant flow is exchanging thermal energy. So what usually comes out of the condensation chamber is a warm liquid, as you can see it's dropping right now. And what comes out of the evaporation chamber is a very cold gas, typically, as you can see. So this warm liquid will exchange thermal energy with this cool gas. So that over here you will see that it is much cooler. So you have a cooler liquid evaporating to help make the system function better. And the opposite end, this cold gas is going to warm up a bit and doesn't really matter too much for the condensation chamber on this end, as it will still condense. Alright. So with that, that will be this will be the improvement to the simple phase change device construction. You can use this anywhere that you can create a stable temperature source, and this setup can be connected to tank networks, pipe networks, or you can even have radiator networks used to warm up and cool down your base. Again, highly efficient in terms of power. Highly efficient in terms of power. Thank you, Suit Lady. This system on its own only uses 100 watts and can very effectively move thermal energy. As you see, we're getting this tank is getting, it's nicely dropping. And with the way you set the chambers, you can very effectively throttle the system. Like I mentioned before, see 4.3 megapascals is how far this goes. If for some reason you need to include safeties, or your temperature source should not ever go above or below a certain point, you could throttle this system. Like for example, if 60 Celsius was too much, maybe this would have been set to 4.2 megapascals. And as you can see, because this tank is, what is 4.2? 4.2 is, yeah, roughly 60. That was a good guess. Because this tank is rapidly approaching its limit, you will see very little condensation is occurring, which in turn means this is going to rapidly slow down, and to eventually it will just stop. Now it's still pushing some liquids out because I'm having condensation in my pipe network. Theoretically, you wouldn't have filled this to the point that this would happen, but this is what the safety margin is for. If you don't really need the systems to be throttled, you can go ahead and run them both at full tilt. Alright, and with that, that is how to build a simple phase change device loop for heating or cooling. Um, Best of luck to everyone out there, and have a good time building.